Okay, so again, my name is Jan, KD7ZWV. I'm the new vice president, but I'm still going to be doing a lot of the training, a lot of the advanced training. So I enjoy that so much that I'm going to keep doing it. So I've usually been doing the second Thursday trainings, which are the advanced topics trainings. I don't know how advanced they've always been, but we'll see how it works out, and we'll go from there. So tonight I'm going to talk about ham radio nets and formal traffic passing. And again, as Gordon mentioned, this is somewhat apropos with our parade discussion that we just had, but our net for the parade will be much less formal than what we're going to talk about tonight. So, so let's talk about ham radio nets. What are nets? Nets are basically an on-air gathering or meeting of ham radio operators. So the general rule is 3 or more operators makes up a net. What do you call it if you don't have 3? If you only have 2 people? It's just a QSO, right? You're just having a talk. 2 people talking, no big deal. But if you got 3 or more people, you're going to call it a net. Could be an impromptu net or a scheduled net. They're typically on a fixed schedule or frequency. We have our Sunday evening nets. We do them every Sunday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. We have a set frequency for that. We use the Ensign Peak repeater for that. All the information for that is on the website if you want to join in or even just listen in. We also have our check-in nets that we do prior to the meeting, and we did one today, but I think Gordon and I were the only ones there.
Yeah, so
it was just a QSO because it's just the 2 of us, right? So we vary the frequency. On the first Thursday, we do it on our Murray 220 repeater. The second Thursday, we do it on a Simplex 220 frequency. And the third Thursday, did I say Tuesday last time? I meant Thursday. The third Thursday, we do it on a 2-meter Simplex frequency.
Okay,
and
I got my 220 rig out of the garage and blew the dust off, put an antenna together, and a nice QSO on the way in on the repeater, but nobody else was on it.
Yeah, so this week we were on the Simplex frequency. So
and I was on the repeater earlier today and found out I didn't have the offset set in this radio. I reprogrammed this. I had it in my other radio, but not this one. So
sure, you had a question?
About the time for this, since we're now
meeting here. Yeah, because we've been doing those check-ins at 6 o'clock. When we were doing our meetings virtually, there was no problem to do the quick check-in and then jump right into the Zoom call for the meeting. We may look at changing that. I don't know. We may look at calling it a talk-in net or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you can just hop on while you're on your way to the meeting and check in that way.
Or something.
Start maybe a little later or even a little earlier. I don't know which. We'll have to play around with the idea and see what we can do with it. But yeah, you guys were all here at 6 o'clock. So if you didn't have your radio with you, hard to check in, right? So we're being charged. Yeah. I hate it when that happens. When you pull out your radio and it's like, what? I have 1 bar? Oh no. How long will it last? And it lasts like 8 seconds. You know? And then you don't even have time to ID at the end of your call, right? So it's like, oh no, that's terrible. Okay, so nets are usually for a specific purpose. They can be for a discussion of a common topic or some topic of interest. They can be for emergency use. They can be used for message relaying, or they can be used for a regular gathering for conversation. So let's talk about a formal net operation. So you're going to have a net control station or an NCS. I'm going to use this NCS term several times. I'll probably call it net control most of the time, but if I say NCS, you'll know what I'm talking about. The net control is responsible for starting and ending the net. They call for member check-ins. They'll either do a roll call. We usually do a roll call on Sunday, followed by an ad hoc check-in for visitors. And so you could have either a roll call or ad hoc or a combination of the 2. The net control keeps track of the roster, keeps track of who's calling into the net, also who has traffic for the net, things like that, and orchestrates the operation of the net. So they are the person who is responsible for managing the net and making sure that it flows smoothly and that everybody is able to be heard and get their traffic across. On our Sunday evening nets, we have been rotating the position of net control amongst the members of the club. So I think everybody in the club has done it at least once or twice now. So that's kind of different from a lot of clubs. A lot of clubs have a dedicated net control operator who runs every net. We've chosen not to do that in Murray. We like the idea of everybody getting some experience doing that and being able to say, hey, I can do net control. I'm not afraid of it. I can handle that. That's something I can do. So you'll also have a net manager who sets the schedule, assigns the net controls and so on. For our purposes, that's going to be Brad. He's our net control coordinator. Large nets may have multiple net control stations that are geographically diverse. So if you're having a net on HF, for example, you may find that your net control operator can't hear every station that wants to check in, but there's another operator, 500 miles away that can hear another station that wants to check in. So a lot of times there will be multiple net controls that can check people in, and they will share that information amongst themselves as far as who they're able to hear and who they're not able to hear. That way they can also ensure that messages from those stations checking in can make it to the rest of the net. They can pass that information around so that everybody gets the information. We have not had to do that because our nets are really small, but that is an option for a formal net control. For an informal net, they may or may not have a net control. Quite often they operate in what they call a round robin fashion, where I was just, I went for a walk last night and I had my radio on and I was listening to a couple of guys, 3 guys, so enough to make a net, on the 6.2 repeater. One of them was David, KD7UUF, who was actually my very first radio contact. And then there was another Dave on the radio and a guy named Tom, and they were talking about metal detector finding things. So they do a lot of that kind of metal detection stuff, and they were talking about that. And so that was an informal net. It just kind of popped up in the evening as they were talking, and it was on a specific subject. They were talking about the metal detecting, and they proceeded to pass the traffic in a round robin. So each one would say something, and then they would either ID or some way to hand off who was talking to the next person in the circle. So it would go David, and then Tom, and then Dave, and then David, Tom, Dave, just kind of around in a circle. So if Dave had something that he was asking Tom, he'd wait until David said his thing, and then Tom would answer, right? So it wouldn't you wouldn't stop and go back and forth between 2 people. You keep it going around in a circle. That's the round robin fashion. So, but that was just a sample of a net that I heard last night. So examples of formal nets, our Sunday evening net, our weekly check-in nets, those are formal nets. We have a net control station that calls out, says, hey, we're starting this net, who's there, and ends the net when they're done. Informals, an example would be if you have your radio on in the morning. Well, I haven't done this in a while because I haven't been commuting to work, but a lot of times guys on the 6.2 will talk about the traffic, as in highway traffic. And they'll say, boy, there's an accident over here or something like that. And so you'll know what's going on. There'll also be just kind of general rag chew conversation as well, typically in those morning and evening nets. So those are kinds of things where you can jump in. I've heard as many as 6 stations on one of those impromptu ad hoc nets on the 6.2 before. And if you're listening and you don't feel like you are going to contribute, you don't have to say anything. But every now and then they'll say something and you'll be like, I have an idea that would answer that question. So you just kind of break in with your call sign in a gap in between 2 people talking, just say your call sign. They'll hand it off to you and tell you who to pass it to next. You can say your spiel, stick it with them for a couple of cycles around, and then say, well, I got to go, guys, 73, and you're clear, and they'll continue the round robin themselves. So very, very good thing to do, fun thing to do. So let's talk about formal nets. There's several different kinds of formal nets. The ones that you are probably most familiar with or most sure about are traffic nets, which are for relaying formal messages. That means actual written down stuff, right? They could be both routine or emergency messages, and we'll talk about message precedence a little bit later. They used to be used very often. They were originally instituted by the ARL back in 1914. And in fact, ARRL stands for American Radio Relay League, and it was all about message passing in nets, right? So they're still doing it.
One thing I read about that, there's a book, I think the one I read was 200 Meters and Down, which was written in like 1929. And they talked about this because back then radios had 5 to 10 mile range.
Right.
And so they set this up and they actually, one of their messages was they went from the East Coast to the West Coast and back.
By passing
By relay.
to individual
5 miles at a
stations
time.
along the way.
And I think they got it there and back in like 2 hours. They
It's
were
pretty-
surprised even how quickly it went.
It's pretty cool. So we're going to talk.
In the 1920s, there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of radio operators. It was a new thing, but they were able to.
But they were able to get a
message
message.
Coast to coast.
From coast to coast. That's cool.
2 hours on CW.
Yeah.
On CW, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So nowadays they're mostly used during emergencies, times when other messaging systems like cell phones or the internet are not available for whatever reason. And we're going to talk about the national traffic system in a minute here, but that is a system that was designed specifically for moving messages from one place to another, and we'll talk about it a bit. There's also DX nets where people will talk about, hey, there's a DX opening on a particular band. DX stands for distance transmission. Basically, let's say you're a general class operator and you're working on your Worked All States award, and you've got 3 states left to get. Maybe you haven't got anybody from Hawaii, Maine, or Alaska yet. You can hop on one of these DX lists, and if somebody says, hey, there's a guy from Hawaii, this is his call sign on this frequency, you can tune over to that frequency and try to get him and get your state there. So these are what the DX nets are used for typically, is just kind of sharing information about where the band openings are, what frequencies are working for different distances and things like that. So I haven't done anything with any of that, but that's certainly a thing that people are doing. So yes.
There's a couple of nets too, where the purpose of the net is actually to work the station on frequency. They'll have some rare DX on 40 meters, and they'll take check-ins who want to work them, and they'll take them in turn. And sometimes if you can't find them any other way, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, we've also talked previously about summits on the air and parks on the air. And those are similar type of setups where, a person will say, well, I'm going to go to this park, maybe Zion's or whatever, and I'm going to set up my radio and I'm going to be on this frequency. Hit me there if you can. And people will see that and they'll try to get into you. So very, very fun if you're into the long distance type of stuff. So there's also topic or club related nets. They could be related to a geographic location. For example, a regional club or something like that. It could be related to a special interest. My example was people who are interested in vintage radio equipment, for example. Maybe, some of the old World War II radios that are still out there that people resurrect and actually use to talk on the air. Those guys like to get on the net and talk about what they've got, what they've found, how they've been able to get it to work, and that kind of thing. There might be nets for specific modes or bands. Normally, when we do HF stuff, we do it on one of the sidebands, either upper or lower sideband, depending on which band we're on. Some people are still doing AM and playing around with that. There are places where you can utilize AM, which uses both sidebands. So that might be an area where there might be a net for that, for AM users or something like that. Or there might be a net for specific technologies like solar power or computers or something like that. So, and finally, there are swap and trade nets where people will offer items that they have for sale or ask about buying things from other operators. But you have to be careful there because remember, we're not allowed to talk about things like business related stuff on the radio. However, there is an exception for ham radio related equipment. So if you do, I know they have who's the swap net? Isn't that the VHF Society that runs that?
I think on Tuesdays, yeah.
Yeah. So you can hop on there. Like if you need an antenna for a particular band or something, you might find somebody on there who's either got one or has made one or knows how to make one and can help you make one. So, that's a good way to get in touch with people who have different equipment that you're either looking for, or if you've got equipment you want to get rid of, you know, you could do that. Not that anyone would. Why would you want to get rid of your equipment, right? I mean, come on, talk about it. Okay, so let's talk about traffic. What is traffic? Traffic is messages, information, and logistical requests. So these can be either a directed net or a free operational net. A directed net is where stations communicate via the directives of the net control. So let's say you've got two stations that need to send a message from one to the other. Rather than just talking to each other, they will confirm with net control that they can talk to each other. So station A might say to net control, hey, I want to go direct with station B. And net control will say, okay, station A and station B go up 5 megahertz and our 5 kilocycles are 50. What's a reasonable amount? 50 kilocycles, and do your direct conversation there. And so that will be directed by the net control, or they could be free where stations just talk freely amongst themselves without any direction. So kind of like our ad hoc net that we were talking about earlier with the traffic reports and stuff. That would be just a kind of a free communication. There's no designated net control for that. All right, now we're going to talk about the National Traffic System, or NTS. So I've got like 20 slides for this, maybe more. So I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly. If you have questions, don't wait till the end. Just shout out your questions, or, you know, throw a hand up or stick a foot out or whatever you want to do. Dan's got his foot out. So. Okay, so the National Traffic System. This is a set of procedures and protocols to support the movement of traffic from place to place. It operates at several different levels. It operates at the local level, the section level, the regional level. I left out the area level, but there's an area level as well, and then the national level, and there's even international traffic that can be passed through this mechanism. Now, we don't typically use NTS for international traffic, but depending on the needs, you can use a similar functionality as the NTS to do that. Typically handles written messages. So if someone wants to get a message from place to place, they will submit that message to an operator as a written message. We'll talk about that in a bit. And it supports operating in directed nets. So there is a net control operator involved. This is a system. It's not a net. So it's a collection of other nets operating together, following a similar set of procedures and protocols in order to work together to accomplish the goal. Okay. It's potentially, I mean, you might have a local net that gets a message and hands it off to a section net, who hands it off to a regional net, and so on. And we'll talk about the message passing and how that happens in a second here. So let's talk about the principles of operation. If you think of the net like a tree structure, if any of you guys are computer guys, you probably will know what a tree structure looks like. But think about it just like a regular tree, but kind of upside down, right? So the leaves are at the bottom and the trunk is at the top. The leaves are the local nets. That could be a city net, a community net, something maybe even at the county level or something like that. The twigs that are holding the leaves are the section nets. So for our section, I think our section covers all of Utah. Dan, is that correct? Yeah. California has like 3 sections. There's like a Northern California, Central California, and a Southern, and I think Texas has like 4 or 5, I don't know, but there are multiple sections. Sections are defined by the ARL. So I don't have a diagram of them, unfortunately, but I'm sure it's available online. Then those twigs are connected to branches, which correspond to that regional level. So think about your call sign number as your region, right? So if you're like KD7, you're in region 7. If you're KD5, you're in region 5, and you might be in Texas or Oklahoma or somewhere like that. If you're 6, you might be in California, for example. And actually, I think this is slightly incorrect because I believe Utah is actually in region 12 as far as the NTS is concerned. But I'd have to go look that up again to make sure. But in general, it follows the same regions that your license, your call sign follows.
That it was issued.
that it was issued because you may have moved. Now, it used to be if you moved, you got a new license or a new call sign. So like if I moved to New Hampshire, I might have gotten a KD1 call sign for New Hampshire. But now they don't do that anymore. They just say, hey, whatever you got when you got it, you're fine. And some of it is a little different too, because like Alaska is, they all start with, well, they used to start with KL. So KL7 was Alaska calls. And so you could always tell, oh, it's a KL7, that's an Alaska call. I want to talk to that guy. But that's no longer the case. They don't distinguish that anymore. So they used to be the same way, yeah. So KH for Hawaii, right? Yeah. So and then the main branches would be the areas. So the US is divided into 3 areas. You've got your Pacific area, Central area, and Eastern area, or for your viewpoint, Pacific, Central, Eastern. And then the trunk would be the transcontinental core, who actually handle moving traffic between those areas. Okay, so if I'm in the Eastern area and I need to get traffic to the Pacific area, a TCC operator is going to handle moving that message for me. Message don't, I have a typo there. Messages don't have to start or end their life at any particular level. A message could appear at the regional level, for example. And if it reaches another point, say a section level where the operator handling it can actually deliver it directly, it can stop at the section level. It doesn't have to go down to a local level. So that's an interesting factor. And also, if a message is staying like within the section, it doesn't ever have to even go to the area level. It can just go into the section level and then back down to another local level. So it only goes as far as it needs to go, basically. All right, so let's talk about principles of operation a little bit more. There's an example. Say we've got a message that's starting at North Texas. Where is that there? It's really annoying. Get rid of that.
Second to the bottom row, far left.
Okay. Sorry about that. Why didn't somebody tell me that was on the screen? All right, so let's say we started at North Texas. So Texas is in the 5th region, there's North Texas here. So a message comes into North Texas and it needs to go to Louisville, Kentucky. So it's going to go up to the 5th region net, and then from there it's going to go to the central area net, and then it'll go into the 9th region net and down into Kentucky, and then into a local net in Louisville, for example. Let's say a message starts in Pierre, comes into South Dakota area here, and wants to go to Bismarck. It's going to go from South Dakota to the 10th region net and right back down to North Dakota, and then on to Bismarck, right? So let's say a message came in from, California, from the Pacific area, and is destined for a station in Minneapolis. So it's going to come into central area. It'll go to the 10th region, up to Minnesota, and then into Minneapolis. So pretty straightforward. You can see how kind of they fit together. You'll notice also in this central area, this is only the central area. So there's a corresponding grid for the Eastern and for the Pacific that would be adjacent to it, right? And the TCCs, the transcontinental core operators, are the ones who move messages between the area nets, right? So let's see. All right. So local nets, they could be running on VHF or UHF. They could be using a local repeater or repeater network. Could be using VHF packet to send digital messages to a packet bulletin board system. Section nets might be running on VHF or HF. In our case, for example, we have the Intermountain Intertie that covers quite a bit of the state. So a net that was operating on that intertie network at the section level could reach anywhere from, northern Utah all the way down to St. George, but it wouldn't be able to reach like Price but there is the Sinbad network that could reach over to price. So it could happen completely at that level on VHF. So typically those, however, would be running on HF. They would be using a suitable band that's acceptable for distances of the, 50 to 300 mile range. So regional nets will typically be on HF. They'll use voice or digital modes. Digital modes are often preferred because there's less opportunity for error in transcription if you've got text that's typed in. We'll talk a little bit about, well, I don't remember if I have anything on the digital modes in my slide deck, but if we don't, we'll hit it in a little bit. And then the TCC is generally always on HF. They're responsible for the wide area communications between the areas. So basically from East Coast to West Coast, right? So digital relay stations. So these are preferred for local section, region area, and inner area or national traffic. They provide you with a reliable message transfer, as I just mentioned. They typically have error correction and automated retransmit. So if I send, if I take my message and I put it into the system, I will know if it got to its destination or not. It'll either get there intact or it won't get there at all, right? So, so that'll be known to me as the operator sending it. They can operate at many levels simultaneously, and I think I have a diagram of that coming up here. They can also operate outside of the normal structure, and that's what my diagram is going to show. Another potential is for CW relay. Sometimes CW is the best or only mode to get through from one station to another. So CW can do it. Other modes might not be able to make it, especially in these times when the bands are so weird. We don't really know. You might normally be able to talk to St. George on a particular frequency, and right now you can't, for example. But in general, CW can often get through where there's too much noise or whatever for other modes to make it. All right, so this is that digital diagram I was talking about. So essentially, there's these NTS digital stations, and they can take traffic basically from the local level all the way up to the international level, and be able to pass traffic directly from station to station. I know there's more information on the digital stuff that I did not put in this presentation because I thought it was too long already. We may cover that in a future presentation. So let's see. So let's talk about NTS policies a little bit. So the typical operation uses a 4-cycle sequence for voice and CW messages happening around the country, right? So these cycles are designed to facilitate high volume transfer of messages. And you'll see all these times you're in, you can see. So you'll see, for example, if we have to spin up cycle 1, message can come into the section level and go to the region level. And then in cycle 2, it'll hit the area level. And then in cycle 3, it could go back to the region level. And then in cycle 4, we redeliver back into the section level. So a message can make it from one side of the country to another in the course of 10 a.m. to 7:15 p.m. So the basic idea is that these nets are scheduled. They start and end at a specific time. And they are, at least at the area level, they're pretty tightly controlled. So they typically have a lot of messages that are going back and forth. They don't have time for messing around. There's no, well, how's the weather in, outer Zimbabwe today? Well, I don't have time to tell you. I got to get the next message, right? So don't expect it to be very conversational. But the main purpose is to get those messages through from one end to the other. And the reason that it was set up this way was to facilitate passing messages in both directions across the country within a day, right? So you might need cycle 2, 3, and 4 to deliver a message west to east, and you might need 1, 2, and 3 to deliver a message from east to west, for example. That's basically the idea of this cycle setup. So multiple cycles can be activated or deactivated as needed. The intercycle gaps, so there's some gap time in between cycle 1 and the start of cycle 2, for example, that can be used for an ad hoc message pass if needed. This concept resolves time inconsistencies between areas because all the times are listed in UTC, so everybody knows what time it starts, what time it stops. There's no confusion as far as, oh, did that net start at 2 o'clock Eastern or Pacific? You know, that's as much as 3 hours difference. So, you know, if you don't have to worry about that, then there's less trouble in making sure that your messages are getting through. It also allows message passing daytime and nighttime. They can cooperate with each other and pass messages between them. And it facilitates basically moving messages across the entire system within a day. It also facilitates modifications as long as those adjustments return to normal schedules after the need for the modification is ended. So you may have a temporary need, for example, to do a section level pass at this time frame. You could do that as long as after you're done, you return back to the normal schedule. So, all right, let's see. Any station can check into a local or section net. So you don't have to be a member of the NTS to check into a local or section net. Any station with appropriate traffic can check into region or area nets if they can keep up with what's going on the net. Remember, the higher you get on the tree, the faster things are going to be moving, the more experienced the operators are going to be, and the less time they're going to have for fooling around, right? Stations without traffic will be dismissed fairly quickly from the net unless they have a needed delivery point. So let's talk about that a little bit just for a second. So we'll talk about origination of messages and delivery of messages. So if I'm a radio operator and I'm sitting here in Salt Lake, and let's say the mayor of Murray wants to get a message to, I don't know who, the governor, sure. So that message is going to come to me. I'm going to have it in written form, and I'm going to start passing it through the system. When it gets to the station closest to the governor, it's still going to be in written form, and that station is going to deliver it to the governor, for example. So a station like my station might be able to deliver to like the Murray Fire Department, for example, which can pass that message through their public switched or their P25 system, or whichever public service radio system that they have, and get it to another firefighter who's on duty or something like that. If I check into the net and I say, hey, I'm sitting here at the fire department. If you need anything to go to the fire department, I can take care of it for you. That's me offering to deliver traffic in that fashion, right? So visitors to the net should be aware that these nets are operating on a schedule. When the net control operator says, hey, we don't need you, N7XDL, go away, they're not being mean to you. They're just saying, hey, I don't need you on the net right now, so you're okay, get out of here. There's no necessarily specific frequency for these nets. The individual nets can select the appropriate frequency. Nets within interference range of each other should use different frequencies. So for example, if we had multiple nets running, maybe we had a Murray City net running and a Sandy City net running on VHF, we would want to pick different repeaters to run on, not run on the same repeater, because that way we don't interfere with each other. Excuse me. All right, participating stations need to be certified. That's a procedure that takes place at the net management level. These certificates are available at the local, section, region, and area levels. And I just said a minute ago that visitors can check in, and that is okay. But keep in mind that you won't be an official member of the net. You'll be a visitor to the net in that case. Official members of the net will be those who are assigned to a specific thing at a specific time on a specific net to do a specific thing, right? So if you want to become a certified member of the net, then you're eligible for a certificate after meeting at least one of these tasks for 3 continuous weeks, or for 3 months, this looks like. So you have to be a participant as a net station at the appropriate level, or you have to act as a liaison with other nets. So talk about the liaison a little bit. So let's say I'm on my local net. There's going to be a member or a liaison member from the section net that is on my local net. And they're the one who receives the traffic that's going to the section. So if I've got traffic to give to the section or higher, I will give it to that station that is the liaison from the section. Then that section operator will get on their section net and pass it to either another local net or another section operator or something like that, or up the line to a regional or area and so on. So these liaisons kind of straddle the gap between the different levels. To be certified at a higher level, like the area level or the TCC, you have to meet the requirements of those nets as well. And the requirements are similar. So there are general procedures for all of the nets. Basically, the net control station is going to transmit the call up for the net at the time the net is supposed to start. Stations will report in, detailing what they do or what they can do, destinations they have the ability to deliver for, and a list of any outbound traffic that they might have. So if I've got outbound traffic for the section, when I check into the Murray net, for example, I would say that as part of my check-in. This is KD7ZWV. I can deliver to the Murray Fire Department, and I have 3 messages to go to the section level. And then when it gets to the section operator, they'll set up to pass the traffic, my traffic to the section operator. Stations will follow the direction of the net control station. Stations reporting in are held for 15 minutes, even if there's no traffic for them. So if I call in and I say, I can handle traffic for Murray Fire Department, I don't have any traffic, I'm going to hang out for 15 minutes until I'm dismissed from the net. And just in case there's any inbound traffic for me that comes from another station. I'm going to sit there through everybody checking in and listen to make sure there isn't any traffic that needs to go where I can send it. And the station should only leave the net when the net control tells them. They should not ask to leave the net. They shouldn't say, hey, net control, I gotta leave. So bye. They shouldn't be doing that. They should stay there until they're dismissed by the net control. Okay, section nets. They typically use the random call-up method. And we talked a little bit about how you might have a roll call, or you might have kind of an ad hoc call in where people say, the call might go out for stations starting with KA, for example. And so any station starting with KA would call in and say, hey, I'm here, and give their information. And then the net control might say, okay, now stations with KB, check in now, or something like that. So stations with traffic for another station will typically process that traffic as soon as it's determined that there's a suitable station for them to do so. So for example, if I had 3 messages for the section, when the section guy checks in, I'm going to be told to hand my traffic off to the section guy right at that point. I'm not going to wait for everybody to finish checking in. Then I'll come back and I'll check back with the net control to see if there's any more for me at that point, so on. The idea is to get my messages passed as soon as possible. So for the act of passing off those messages, typically on an HF net, stations will move off frequency to another frequency that's close by to avoid their traffic cluttering up the main net. And on a VHF net, you could do the same thing. You could either go to simplex, or you could go to a different repeater that's available that you can both reach to pass that traffic. Let's see. This is a good point here. So if there's traffic available for another locality that isn't available, so say you're at the section level and Murray checks in and Sandy checks in, but nobody from Midvale checked in. The section operator could ask an operator from Murray or Sandy to handle that traffic for Midvale, because they're close enough to Midvale to be able to get into Midvale and do what they need to do, right? So that's a case where you might not have somebody from the destination that you're trying to get to, but you might have somebody from a neighboring area that can get to that. Worst case, write the traffic down on a letter, put it in an envelope, send it through the mail. The idea is to get the traffic delivered one way or another, and that's one way to do it. So you don't want to leave traffic undelivered. Now, there are cases where that can happen, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but in general, you don't want to do that. Excuse me. So at the regional level, stations are going to report the section that they represent, and if they're able to send or receive traffic. And this is an interesting factor here because sometimes you might have more than one station from the same sections checking in to the region. You might do that because maybe one station is going to handle all of the sending and another station is going to handle all of the receiving. And again, this is done to improve the performance of moving messages through the system, right? So that's a potential possibility. So why you would want to do that. Basically, if a station checks in and doesn't say, hey, I can send or hey, I can receive, then they're assumed to be able to do both. So stations that are not authorized representatives that don't have their certificate are not authorized to, let's see, they are able to report the traffic that they have to send. If they don't have any, the net control is probably going to tell them to leave immediately unless they can provide a delivery that nobody else can, right? And any sections not reporting in have special liaison stations and neighboring sections assigned. So for example, in that example case that I just gave where Midvale didn't check in, there might be a known frequency that Midvale people use that the Murray liaison would know and the Sandy liaison would know, and so they could pass the message in that way. Area nets are similar. The stations checking in indicate what other regions or areas they're authorized to receive traffic for, what they have traffic for. The TCC representatives indicate what areas they're able to send and receive traffic for. And again, the send and receive stations, I talked about that already. So where if you have, multiple stations checking in, maybe some can handle sending and some can handle receiving. Miscellaneous procedures. Jeepers. Doing a lot of talking today. Miscellaneous procedures, when stations are directed to move to another frequency, the receiving station will select the named frequency or one close to it, looking for minimal noise and announce their presence, and then the sending station will communicate with them. If the net control station says station A and station B go to this frequency and do your thing, then the first one that was named checks in first. So station A would be checking in first. And typically it's going to be the receiving station. So a station is moving to an alternate frequency should look for an unoccupied frequency close to the one assigned by the NCS. So even if the net control says, I want you to go to like 7.125 kilohertz or megahertz, right? But there's already somebody there and they're having a QSO. You don't want to just jump in there and say, hey, you guys have to stop. We have message traffic to pass. You're just going to go up a little bit and try another frequency. So remember, nobody owns a frequency. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that someone might already be there and be using it. You don't want to just barge in and say, hey, this is mine now, go away, right? So you're just because you're passing message traffic doesn't mean you're allowed to do that. All messages should be assigned a precedence. Now, we glossed over this earlier in the presentation, but basically the precedences that are recognized are emergency, priority, welfare, and routine, and they're in that hierarchy, right? So emergency messages, this is a message that has to be delivered immediately. Somebody's going to die if it doesn't get delivered. That would be considered to be emergency. Or this building is on fire. That's an emergency, right? You want to process those emergency messages first before anything else happens. Priority messages are important traffic with a specific time limit. For example, an ambulance is going to go to this location, maybe at the high school, and will be there for a half an hour to pass out masks or something, right? That's timely. If I don't get that message delivered within the half hour, the ambulance is going to be gone. So that's a priority message and should be handled at a higher priority than the other ones. Of course, emergency takes highest priority. Welfare messages are those reporting or inquiring on health and welfare of somebody. So in my example I have, is Uncle Bob okay? Does he have enough food? That's a welfare message, right? And the response would be Uncle Bob is fine and has 4 days worth of food. He's good. Don't worry about Uncle Bob. So that's more important than a routine message, but it's not more important than a priority message or an emergency message. Now, routine messages are any other messages that might be delivered, right? So
And I noticed too, in your message, you're giving specific information. Yes, 4 days worth of food, as much as you can.
Yes.
Specific information.
give as much information as you can, right? So,
And as specific as you can.
because if I was to say Uncle Bob's fine, he's got food, you know, if he's got, 2 sandwiches or if he's got, 600 pounds of steak in the freezer,
We don't know
So-
when we're gonna get back to him, but if we've got down here, he's got 4 days of food,
then we know
we don't worry about it
Yeah.
for 4 days.
exactly.
Very specific, but yours.
Not to the point of, hey, he's got some crab macaroni.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, Be
Keep it brief. but-
be brief, but be specific as you can, right? So also, remember, we don't give out personal information. So I can say Uncle Bob, but I'm not going to say Uncle Bob who lives on Box Elder Street at 325 West, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to give all that information out over the air because that's personal information. Also, if there's a situation where somebody had a broken leg, I might report there's a patient here with a broken leg, they need an ambulance. I'm not going to tell the name of the patient or any specific details or anything like that over the air because we want to restrict that kind of information. So there are also special handling codes that can be used, and we'll talk about how those are used in just a minute. But basically, there are several different codes, and I've detailed them all here. I'm not going to stand here and read them all to you since we were down to about 15 minutes left for the meeting tonight. So, but I will just leave those there and say that these handling codes are, they're not required to be used, but if a handling code is used in a message or added to a message, it needs to be kept with that message throughout the life of the message from that point on. So if I'm a station and I add an HXC handling code that says report the delivery date and time, that information needs to make it to the receiving destination station so that they know to report the delivery time and date so that that can come back to them. So this is an example of an ARL radiogram. This is basically a paper document that you would have several dozen of, and Dave's got some right there. How about that? He's got a whole pad of them. So the idea being that you fill out the information on this, and that way it doesn't get lost, right? It's on paper. So I don't want to just commit it to my memory and then try to pass it on to the next station, especially if I'm handling 5 messages. I might forget all the details of message 1 before I get to message 5. So this document is to help you get your information notated and moved on to the next station. Let's talk about, so if you see, it's got several different parts. There's a preamble part, there's a message part, and then there's a this part is called, basically it's the signature block saying that that everything was actually done with this message. So we'll talk about the different parts here. So you're going to have the reference number. This is going to be a sequentially increasing number as you pass messages. When I get a message, I'm going to start with number 1, and that's my first message. It's known to be for me because I'm going to put my station over here so you know where it originated from. And it's my message number whatever, so you'll know if message number whatever from station whatever was delivered or not. Precedence goes here, and one of the interesting factors about the precedence is if it's emergency, you want to spell out emergency. You don't want to just say E. Emergency is the only one that you care about. That the rest of them you can just use the first letter. But if it's an emergency message, you want to spell out emergency so it's obvious this is not just a routine message or some other kind of message. This is actually an emergency message. This HX is a handling code that we talked about that can be blank or it can be filled in with one of those codes. The station of origin, that's the station that originated this message originally. This check, we'll talk about that in a minute. Basically, this is a check count of word groups in the message so that
I can confirm that I got the whole message. We'll talk about that when we talk about the text message. The place of origin could be a locality, could be a particular building or address or something like that. The idea being, even if I, as an operator, am operating at the section level and I'm in Utah section, if I got the message from Nephi, I'm going to write Nephi as the place of origin, right? And the time filed and the date filed for the message. Again, you can use local times on this form, but it's a good idea to get in the habit of using UTC time because that way you always know what time. The to block here is the ultimate destination of the message. So this might be Uncle Bob, for example, and his address and his phone number. And then this message was received at my station. This is my number, my name, my address, right? So I'm the one who's handling. All right, let's move on to essentially, right? You've got some header information, you've got the body of the message, and then you've got some trailer information. So continuing on, we've got, so we actually talked about all. This is the same thing, it's just the other areas. So the message itself, right? This is where I'm going to write the text of the message. I'm going to put one word in each entry. I'm going to spell out my words. If I'm writing a number, I'm going to spell it out, like F-O-U-R, right? Not just the digit 4, because that's less likely to get confused. I've got more information on this on another slide, but basically I'm going to write my message in here exactly as I would transmit it. The idea being that the receiving station is going to copy it exactly as I have it written on their copy of the form, and then be able to move it on to the destination. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the end, we have the receive station. This is when I receive the message, and then who I sent it to, right? So this is the signature block of the message saying that, yes, this message was processed. All right, so each station maintains their own log of messages. The text section is usually limited to 25 word groups. You don't use punctuation in a word group. So for example, if I have a comma in my message, I'm going to write the word comma, not a physical comma. And the reason you do that is because you don't want, say you're transmitting this in CW in code, Morse code, you don't want the pro sign to be confused for part of the message, right? So you'd actually spell out comma. You replace. Period would be type, would you say period or dot?
Periods are different, so you put an X for a period, okay? And then if you're sending a number, like say you're sending a frequency, you want to send 7.125, for example, you would replace the period in that with a letter R. I don't know why they picked R, but that's what it says in the document. So, and then you can use the slash character within a word group to separate parts of a word group. So for example, if you've got a, say you were talking about there was a B-25 coming in from Las Vegas or something, you can put B/25 or stroke 25 or something like that. It's just used to separate those within a word group. Remember, we don't want to send messages that are illegal, so we don't want to send any business related traffic. We don't want to send any codes or encrypted messages or anything like that. We don't want to send, and this is an important one. We talk about third party, and who understands what third party means? Few people understand. So basically, third party. Let's say I'm standing at the park with my radio and I'm talking to someone, and there's a 12-year-old kid who's like, "Wow, that's cool." And I say to them, "Do you want to talk on the radio?" And they say, "Yes." I hand the radio to them, and they start talking on it. They're a third party. They're not a licensed amateur radio operator. They're using my station as a third party. If, for example, let's say I am passing a message for the Murray Fire Chief to somebody else. The fire chief is not an amateur radio operator. He's a third party. Okay, so that message traffic is third party traffic. And there are treaties and rules with some countries that allow or disallow us to transmit third-party traffic into or out of those countries. So you need to be aware of that if you're doing any kind of international message passing. Some countries don't allow third-party traffic. I don't have a list, unfortunately, with me, but it's available online. You can look it up. But there are countries that don't have a third-party transfer agreement with the United States. So you need to be aware of that if your message is leaving the country. If your message is staying within the United States, no big deal.
The good news is the list of countries that we do not have a third-party agreement with is small.
It's very short. I mean, like North Korea is on it, and you know, there's a few others that are pretty obvious why they would be on it. But yeah, so it's something to be aware of if you're passing third-party traffic or if you're allowing someone to use your radio. So say you're sitting at home with your radio and you're talking to a station in North Korea, and your cousin is standing there next to you and says, gee, can I talk to him? No, you can't, because that would be third-party traffic, and North Korea does not allow that. Okay, so something to keep in mind. You want to stay legal. If you receive a message that isn't legal, you do not have to pass it on. So say you're one of these intermediate stations in the chain, and a message comes in for you and you're like, this isn't a legal message, I can't do this. Don't pass it on. Send a service message back to the originating station saying, hey, I couldn't pass your message, it was illegal. So they know that their message did not get delivered. Service messages, I just said pass a service message back. Service messages have their message number prefixed with SBC, or they used to. I don't know if they still do that anymore. It seems like that's happening less and less now. But the idea being that these are used in regards to the operation of the net, not the traffic that the net is passing, right? So it would be an informational message from one station within the net to another station, or within the NTS to another station. So it could be something like I just said, where I wasn't able to deliver your message because it was bad. I couldn't do it without risking my license, right? So, yeah.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned North Korea. Let's assume that you were in contact with someone in the country where we do not have third-party approval, and the message is for a ham radio operator who is not on frequency. That he's still a third party.
If you are passing the message for him, he's a third party in your case.
So
If he's standing there with you and you want to let him use your radio, it's his station when he's using it. If he's a ham radio, yes.
Right.
So for example, say it's field day, right? And I go into the get on the air tent. I'm a technician class operator. I'm not allowed to work on general class, but there's a general class operator sitting there. I can get on the radio and operate. I'm third party, even though I'm an amateur radio operator. I'm operating under his license classification. So I'm third party in that case.
Well, a lot of messages that come through NTS too are to there are ARL volunteers who will send out messages to remind you when your license is expired. You're still a third party.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about another category. I think this is about the last thing that I have. And I'm just about out of time, so I'm going to run through this pretty quick. So in your general message, it's just going to be text, right? There are certain messages that have been assigned as common messages, and they are sent in this ARL format. So in the way you would send this in a message, you would send ARL and then a number or two numbers, and then any succeeding information that was required as part of the message. So some of these are for emergency use, some of these are for routine use, and I'll tell you where the breakdown is between them. But these are all detailed in a document called FDS-3, and you can look that up on the ARRL site, and I actually have a link to it at the end of the presentation. But so, for example, if everyone is okay at a place and the message that came in was, hey, how is everybody at, whatever, I can send back ARL1, and they know that everybody's okay. Okay, I don't have to send back everybody is okay. That's 5 words. ARL1 is 2 words, right? Much faster to send. 2 would be coming home as soon as possible. 3, am in named hospital. So in that case, you would say ARL3 IMC, for example, if you were in the IMC. And so there's a whole bunch of these as we go through 4, 5, 6, 7. And when you hit, let's see, I'm not gonna sit here and read them all. If you want to look at the presentation afterwards, I'll put it online. But when I hit 26, that's the last of the emergency level messages. So help and care for evacuation of sick and injured from this location needed at once. That's the emergency qualification message. Rather than saying help and care for evacuation of sick and injured, all I say is ARL 26, and the receiving station knows what I mean. The routine ones start with 46. Greetings for your birthday. Happy birthday. 47, in reference to your message number, whatever, to so-and-so that was delivered on whatever at whatever. So I would say 47, Murray Fire Chief, or message number 375, Murray Fire Chief, March 5th, 1823 hours UTC, right? I would just say those keywords along with ARL 47. So 50, 51, 52, and it kind of goes through. There's a whole bunch of different ones again with this. And I'm not going to stand there and read them all to you because I've got like 30 seconds left. But basically it goes up to 69. Welcome to the region, section, net, whatever. We're glad to have you with us and hope you will enjoy playing with us, playing radio with us. ARL 69 rather than saying all of that as part of the message. So that's all I've got for tonight. So any questions, comments, information, complaints should be referred on the complaint form, which is about that big.
Written on the head of a pin.
Clearly written within this 1 centimeter
Is there
square.
an ARL message for that?
I don't think so.
99,
I think it's -1. Yeah. Dave, go ahead.
I was ICS 215.
The message passing, we can talk about those forms in another class. But yeah, there are other specific forms that are used by ARIES and races, and we'll probably talk about those. Maybe, Dan, maybe you could set up something where someone can come in from ARIES and talk about, the message passing within ARIES and how that works.
I'll see if I can find somebody.
So that would be a useful thing to have a class on. I'm pretty sure that's been done at other clubs before, so you may be able to find somebody from one of the other clubs that has done that.
We've done it in there.
If you can't, I'm happy to put together a lesson for that. Just let me know. But if there's already somebody out there who's got a presentation in the can that they can come in and show it to us, that'd be great. And as far as that goes, if they can't come in, but they can get on Zoom and do it, we can do that. So.
Yeah, we know when you want to do that. I can already get that set up.
Yeah,
You tell me when you want that.
probably in a couple of months. So,
Yeah, I'm thinking in the fall, I think during summer.
It might be dead in a couple of months.
well, hopefully not. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, thanks, Jan.